Hello, and welcome to today's talk where we're going to talk about employability in family law cases. My name is Regina DeMeo, and I'm a family law attorney in Maryland and DC with over 20 years of experience. And with me today is Rona Wexler. She is a national expert and the go-to employability expert in family law cases as well as employment cases. She provides a lot of litigation support, expert reports, and testimony. And I'm so excited to have her here today. Thanks so much for being here, Rona.
Oh, I'm so glad that you have the opportunity. We have the opportunity today. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. So I think the first question that some people will have in mind is, what is a vocational expert? What is your process and what do you do for family law cases?
Well, as a vocational expert in cases, and in any kind of case, my role is to provide, when questions come up about employability, what somebody can do for employment, how much they have the potential to earn reasonably. If they say that they really look for a job and there just isn't anything out there, they want me to affirm or confirm how true that is. And do I find that to be the case? And every individual has a story that's different, and that's okay. But my role is to provide an objective report, because if it's not objective, truly objective, and if it were to go to trial, there would be no credibility. In addition, it doesn't help the parties. My job is to give you the facts, give you my determination about what the market demand is, what your placement is, what it's going to take to get there, and how you can do it.
So do you look at people's resumes? Do you interview them? Like how does your process work when you're figuring that out?
The first thing I will always ask is for an interview. Now, if I'm going to evaluate somebody on the other side, they may or may not agree to it. I believe very strongly that it's in their best interest to agree. I want to hear their story. I want to understand from them exactly what they did, how they accomplished it, or if they didn't, what got in the way. I need to know that. If that doesn't happen, the retaining attorney will often look to me for advice and questions to ask during a deposition. And that's sworn testimony, and that's good. But I really prefer to have this one-to-one interview with the individual so that we can really treat it like a regular interview, as though they were going for a job. I have over 15 years in executive recruiting and hiring. So I understand how to get into the depth of it, to think about how this person could be presented, how they fit in the employment market or labor market as it is now. So that's the first step, is looking for that interview. I have a questionnaire that I've designed, which gives them a walkthrough about what the interview would probably cover. It's not every question, but they're all there. I do ask for resumes, the current one if they have one, or their more recent ones. It's interesting because resumes go through changes as people go through their work life. And so I want to see from the beginning to now, or within the past 10 years. Then we'll just go through that. We'll talk about the extra training they've had, education, of course, any additional coursework since then, how their career pivoted, if it did, how it changed, so that I can get a full breadth of what they've learned, the learning they took to each job, and how they've developed. So that's my first step. Then I create a profile that kind of summarizes all of this, a person's strengths, areas of weakness or concern. Perhaps they need to update skills, get them current, demonstrate that, etc. And then I will determine where the skills and knowledge they have can be applied today. We call those transferable skills. Now, sometimes it's very close to their prior work experience, but sometimes they're coming and they're saying, there's no way I can go back to that type of work. And I have to think about, well, what else could they do? How do these things apply? The interesting piece to that is sometimes they may be interested in doing something new, pursuing a different career. And depending on their age, the income potential that could be imputed to them or assigned to them, possibly, it could make a lot of sense, because we have longer work lives now, and the return on investment, quote unquote, can be pretty strong. And since many of them do get some type of rehabilitative maintenance, which means just time to get themselves back into the market, they should and could use that to make that change if it's going to contribute to their self-support. Okay. So if you want to go back to school to become an artist, that's not something necessarily the court is going to support.
Right.
And unless it's a very practical application. So that's what I do. And then I look at the labor market. We do labor market research. I might talk to other recruiters that I know about this person's ability to be hired in the same or a different job. I'll definitely look at job postings as an indicator of demand, but please note that job postings are just a portion of the jobs that are out there. Most of the jobs that are out there, not or a good many of them, really are uncovered through networking and doing research about what's out there. And that's something that a career advisor can really, really make a big contribution with if somebody engages them. And then I look at the salary surveys. I will talk to people in the field to see how realistic they are. And it is my job to indicate if there is income possibility, what that would be over the next 2 to 5 years. I never go beyond 5 years because at that point it's pretty speculative. And then I wrap it up in a report and I submit it to the retaining attorney, but I'm often appointed as a neutral. I have a number of neutral cases now. And in that case, everybody gets everything at the same time, the court, the two attorneys, etc. Okay. And then the report is usually reviewed so that I want any feedback in case there are errors or omissions. It could be that in the course of the interview, something was forgotten or not explained well, or I didn't understand it properly. And so I want to make sure the report is entirely accurate. And then hopefully the parties will use that to settle the case, at least that part of the case, the financial piece.
Right.
If it doesn't settle, then I may be asked to testify. I probably testify about in less than 10% of my cases in any given year.
Oh, wow.
You know, I attribute that to very good lawyers and people who found a way, including the judges, the judges really pushing them to settle to make it happen. And I think having an objective report is useful. It doesn't mean both of them will entirely agree with it, but it does mean that it's a roadmap and I've given some direction.
Yeah, no, I mean, we find them invaluable in all of our alimony cases that we have to try and settle because, right, the biggest shock is usually, unfortunately, like me being the deliverer of the bad news that, look, if you're under the age of 55, the court's going to expect you to do something. Right? You can't just sit home and collect alimony, even if you've been out of the workforce for the last 8 years. So once that shock is absorbed, we have to get people like you involved to sort of help them figure out, well, what could I be earning? I mean, they can make a choice to stay home, right? I mean, we can't force someone to go back to work.
I always open up with two things. That about the objectivity of the report and how important it is for them to be disclosed. And the other piece to it is a gentle, and I do mean a gentle reminder. Now, whatever the number might be, whether you agree with it or not, whether you think it's worth your time or it's cost beneficial, nobody's telling you have to go back to work, not at all. You can make any decision you wish. It's just that if a number is imputed, what they call imputed to you, assigned to you, whatever it is, you're going to have to make financial decisions about that.
Right.
I mean, I have a very good friend whose husband thought that she would return to full-time employment instead of remaining in part-time. She was also, she had a lot of interest and she was an artist and she elected to live within her means. And she was quite happy with it. I mean, yes, she used to travel a lot with first class with her husband. She traveled in group tours and things of that nature later on and was very happy with it, has had a good life. So that's an important thing for somebody to recognize. You know, sometimes an attorney will ask me after I've delivered my not so great news, I said, look, if you want them to speak with me, I can deliver some hard news with a velvet glove, but at least I can help them understand that in my experience, and I've handled hundreds and hundreds of cases, this is how these things have developed. And yes, the courts now are very clear that they expect somebody to return to work. It may not be much, and they may not see it worth their time, but they do expect them to contribute, at least in part, to their own support. The hard part for a lot of them is they've been in a role for a while, even if it's just a few years, and it's all encompassing, particularly if you're taking care of kids. And so it's very hard for them to see anything but obstacles in front of them about returning to work versus what are the opportunities, and also how do I get there? I really need to understand how to make this happen. And I'm scared, and I think I'm too old, even at age 45, and even at age 55, to return. But lifespan is so much longer now, and Social Security maximum benefit, not maximum, the full benefit is at 67. You can delay it till 70 and a half if you so wish. But we see more and more people doing that, especially in professions or just work that is more or less white collar, or work that people just genuinely enjoy doing. So it's a challenge for individuals to see the future in a different way.
I mean, I've been practicing for 22 years now, and even over the 22 years, it's just completely changed. I mean, I think in the beginning, there was a lot more sympathy to stay-at-home mothers and wives, and now it's the preference is towards short-term alimony, and then figure it out, because it's not meant to be a lifetime pension.
Yes, that is a heavy thing. People have frequently, especially if they've been into a marriage for like 20 years, which is a long time. I was married for over 30, 35, and they really do think that at that point, this is what's owed me. I'm entitled. It is a question of entitled, and we see that a lot. And why are you asking me to change my lifestyle and to go and return to work? And very often they're still going to get a decent piece, and they have assets as well. It's just, years ago, I was at a New Jersey matrimonial conference. It was one of their annual things. It's huge. And they had a panel of like top notch attorneys, very strong reputations. And I'm sitting there and listening to one of the gentlemen say, the truth is that it's really hard in most cases to support two different households in the same lifestyle as with one. And it's a hard pill to swallow. But the sooner we recognize that as individuals, the more we can start to move forward and make plans to do so, whatever that is. So that's the work I've been doing. I find it very rewarding. Sometimes it's more challenging than others, especially when you have people who just aren't ready to hear this.
I mean, I like to emphasize the fact that, do you really want to remain so vulnerable, right, to someone that you're now estranged from? Because each month you have to hope that check arrives. Like each month, right? Like you have to hope that person doesn't get hit by a bus, right? Or,
It's interesting. Yes, it's interesting you should say that, because a significant number of my cases are post-divorce actions. Whether it be the person who is the heavier earner suddenly getting laid off, and here's a good one. And so this young person, he's under 45, so he was youngish, and I would say young. He lost his job. I'd say young. I say young. So he called in not as much of a panic, but a little bit. I just got laid off. I need someone like you. I need to go to court and get a downward modification. And when did you get laid off? Well, I just got notice. He said, let's call him John. Okay. John, it's really way too early to do that. No court is going to listen to you. They're going to have you go back and really hit the pavements and really do everything you can to find a job at as comparable in earning capacity as you've had. If it doesn't happen, if you've done everything you can and you have documentation to show that, then you can reapproach. But even then, they may ask you to go into savings and other things in the meantime, etc. And you have to be prepared for that. So I said, well, what do I need? You mean, and so I remember he said to me, what do you mean documents? I said, well, a good job search is going to have documentation,
Yep.
preferably something like an Excel spreadsheet that says on a daily basis what you've been doing, who you called, what the results were, what the follow-up is going to be, where your application is in terms of in process, if it's not a networking event, etc. And to keep and use that as your tool, right? As any organization tool. It should be well organized and easy to track. And then of course you want to keep a record of your applications and your emails and things like that. And I remember he said to me, he goes, I have to do all that just to prove, that I'm working, that I'm looking for a job. And after heaving a big sigh, I said, no, that's not the only reason. But if you really do everything we've discussed about what you need to do to find a job, all the networking calls, emails, meetings, etc., and follow up and applications, if you don't do that, then all those efforts will kind of slip through and you won't be able to use your time and all the things that you've done to really move forward. So it's really for you to be effective. It's not necessarily only to show with court. And if you don't do this, I promise you, your job search will take longer and be more frustrating. So he never called back. I think he found a job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, some cases, like the one I think we discussed offline was the one that I told you where my surgeon developed a disability, could no longer, really, it was easy to document this man could no longer earn what he once earned because he could no longer perform surgery. And unfortunately, the ex-wife had not planned for this day, which to me was like inevitable. Like, how did you not plan for this day?
I mean, you knew. What did you think he could do? Now, it doesn't mean he can't earn something for sure. I mean, in my head is spinning about some things he could do, but it's probably never going to pay him the kind of money that specialized surgery would. And by the way, at a certain point in time, surgeons can't continue that. It's not a lifelong career, like anything else. The other thing I try to explain to people, even when I'm just meeting them and we're talking about my work, is to say people do need to be prepared. It's one thing to think that I'm only thinking about divorce, but I'm not. I know from personal experience that life happens. So what if, I have a family member whose husband was had a sudden accident, a fatal accident, and she had been reminding him to get mortgage insurance, right? He never did. Okay. He had a life insurance policy, but he never got the mortgage insurance, and it changed her earnings, her ability to support herself, etc. The other thing is, on a personal note, my husband was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease and did continue to work with that for a period of time. And he had a long-term disability policy for a period of time. But at a certain point, when he could no longer work, there's no long-term disability, right? He's done. And people get in accidents, they have disabling diseases, even if they're temporary. It could be that you will be without any money for a number of years, from your primary wage earner. So I think it's very important for people to understand that these events can happen. And hence my other piece of advice. With newlyweds or people who are remarrying, usually the latter, not as much. Some people are just eager to throw up their hands and say, I'm done. I'm going to have this other life and I'm going to be taken care of. I always advise anybody, male or female, if you're thinking of stepping out, particularly to care for family members or things of that nature, please maintain presence part-time. And not part-time where somebody gives you hours and you run into the office and then you run home, okay? Because you have so many other things. No, as a way of staying current, of being able to point to achievements and accomplishments that you've had in that role, to build your network with your colleagues and others so that if anything should happen, You're not starting from scratch.
Right.
And you've already learned the balance of work and life, even if it's part-time. Going to full-time is a challenge, but at least you've already started to do that. And so, and plus, it makes you feel good. And I remember when my mom went back to work and we had different chores around the house now that were different, more, everything from putting the roast in the oven to making sure when I got my driver's license, picked up my sister or something like that.
Right.
There was a definite change in her in terms of just being able to be herself in a different environment. And as I say to people when I interview them, your kids will whine about the extra chores sometimes. They will forget, and you may be nagging more than you would like. But deep down, they're proud of you. They really are.
Absolutely. So I want to make sure we're on time with wrapping up, but I know people are probably going to try to use COVID as an excuse. Well, it's a pandemic, so I really can't work right now. So in your reports, how do you take into account the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic?
Well, I have we've been revising our disclaimer about the pandemic. I want to emphasize a few things. First of all, certain positions, certain jobs and industries are hit much harder than others. Obviously, hospitality, travel, etc. Economists are predicting a big pent-up demand for a lot of these things, but it will be different. If you're an event planner, for example, that's going to be different because there's, folks are starting to see, do I really need to attend this huge, huge Las Vegas show when really we've really had a lot of success otherwise. And hiring is still going on, I promise you. I get notices in my networking group. I look at job postings. Jobs are being filled. They really are, as people are pivoting. So COVID is not an excuse. It may take longer, to be sure, okay? Not the least of which is that we now have to network using this kind of technology, or the phone, which is perfectly acceptable, or meeting people for coffee virtually. But whatever it is, it also tends to be more efficient. People are more apt to give you a 20-minute, call on Zoom or team meetings or something like that, or FaceTime, rather than go through the whole thing about stepping out, meeting for coffee, etc. And so in some ways, there's advantages as well as disadvantages. People should start doing that right away. You can also work on your social media, particularly things like LinkedIn, if that's appropriate for you. You can start, that's where working with a career advisor early is so helpful, because now we have this time to do the research, to make sure that we're digging deeper into the companies that might be good fits for us, talking to people who can make introductions and referrals, or someone who can give us some mentoring advice. This is the time to do it. Absolutely. And so when people get whatever the judgment is and whatever the duration of alimony is, one of the last things I close in my interviews is the following. It is likely you will get some type of support for a certain period of time. I have no idea what that will be. But the one thing I do caution you about is this is the time that's been granted to you to get you on your feet, not to only be supported. And if you delay it and you find that you're really like a deer in headlights and haven't taken enough steps for it, if you think you can go back to the court and ask for an extension, it's unlikely, highly unlikely to be given any serious consideration, unless there are other extenuating circumstances that are pretty severe. Right. So please use this time. You'll want to postpone it. You'll want to push it off because it's uncomfortable, but please don't. Great advice. So this has been awesome. If people want to contact you for further information, I want to make sure we're able to share that. What's the best way to reach you? Well, phone, of course. I think it's an old-fashioned but a good tool. Yep. And so my number is up there, 646-335-5236. Almost all of my interviews now are conducted virtually. That had started even before COVID, but now it's pretty exclusive. And you can also reach me at Rona, R-O-N-A, and where my website address is theemployabilityexpert.com. Well, Rona, thank you so much for doing this today. Oh, it's been great. Your questions are terrific, and you're such an outstanding professional. I'm so glad to have you in my constellation. Thank you. And thank you for all for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.